It's another Friday, and that means it's another edition of the Zogby Report, real and unscripted. And we really are real and unscripted. Not only does Jeremy nor our special guest know what we're going to talk about, but frankly, I haven't decided yet either. But anyway, Jer, how are you?
I'm great. How about you?
Good, thanks. So we got a special guest this week, and that's really exciting. Joe Trippi, one of the premier, if not the premier, Democratic consultant in the United States, in the world today. I've followed his career many times. He's credited with changing the face, changing the methodology of how modern campaigns are run. And the campaign, almost successful campaign where he revolutionized the use of social media, goes back to 2003, 2004, with the famous Howard Dean campaign, which came that close. But Joe, just a reminder where he started.
Way back.
Back. So welcome. How are you doing?
Yeah, that's great. Great to be with you, John and Jeremy. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start right out. November 8th. How big was it? Did something big happen?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that look, for midterms, it was as successful a midterm. I think the only one that might have been more successful would have been George W. Bush, right after, in the wake of 9/11, in 2002. Where I think that's the only one I can remember where somebody actually picked up one or two seats, in the House. So I think by any measure, particularly with the economy where it is and was, inflation, gas prices, Biden's approval rating, all those things, I understand why a lot of people expected Democrats to be to really suffer 30 seats or more in the House and to not hold on to the Senate. But I always thought it was going to be really close, and it goes back to just sort of remembering the 2010 midterms, where Obama lost 63 seats. I mean, people would say, well, okay, what did you learn from that one that would tell you that this one was going to be close? And what I learned, I think, was you had Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, who I think she was on, was it Bill Maher or something, and started talking about how she had dabbled in witchcraft, and it got so out of hand that she actually had to run ads saying, "I'm not a witch." It was seen pretty extreme. And the same thing, I think, with Sharon Angle in Nevada, a bunch of and so what happened was what crushed that. Like, okay, so this wave is crashing and taking out 63 House seats, but the Republicans don't win the Senate. And the reason they don't win the Senate is those two kind of extreme, out of the ordinary candidates cost them those seats. So I was looking at this one very early, and as Herschel Walker, we'll see what happens. But Herschel Walker and Dr. Oz and Masters and in Arizona, saw the number of candidates that I just thought were outside enough of the mainstream that I was seeing the same kind of thing that I saw in 2010, except in 2010 it was just two or three, so a handful of candidates. And this year, for whatever reasons, I just thought the number of election deniers, conspiracy theorists. Look at Boebert in Colorado 3. I mean, is a good sign that there was something happening out there that went beyond the midterm election. That there was a definition.
Yeah. So here's what baffles me. Jerry and I did some polling, mainly Jeremy, and how, number one, there are two things. One, how the Republicans miscalculated on issues. They were convinced that the abortion issue was going away. Nobody was going to be talking about it, inflation. Election denial. Look, nobody's talking about election denial. We discovered, right, Jer? You're going to talk about it more detail, but poll of independents at battleground states, the number one turnoff for independents that made them choose Democrats in those battleground states was election deniers. That's one miscalculation.
Right. Yep.
Miscalculation, and I'd like you to address both, if you would, was why did they raise expectations to the point they did? Why wouldn't they talk about modulating their expectations? Oh, if we just get control of the House, that'll be a victory. But I was on with, a bunch of Republican pollsters on a number of TV shows, and it was all about 30, 40 seats, maybe 50, 60 seats. We're going to win the Senate with 54. Why does anybody do that?
That is the only thing I can think of there was that they were seeing so much energy on the Democratic side and early votes and things like that, that they thought they had to counter it and try to energize we can win this thing, we can win it big, get out there, is the only rational reason. Although I kind of side with you, that I think it might have been more motivating to say, hey, we need every vote because this is going to be really close. And, but I don't know, maybe they actually believed it. I don't think, I really thought a lot of the crummier polls out there, the quick fire ones that were just dumped in the last few weeks, were kind of like front running, trying to raise the red wave is coming thing again, to get to suppress Democratic turnout maybe and to increase energy on the right. But those have magically all stopped now. Even in the Georgia race, you don't see a lot of those guys up at polls. But so I don't,
or at least not being covered,
yeah. Or did they really believe their own, their own stuff? I mean, I'm flabbergasted by, first of all, to think in the wake of Kansas, in the wake of, and this, by the way, I think it was punditry writ large. How in the wake of Kansas, how in the wake of, in all 5 special elections for Congress, Democrats outperformed Biden in all 5 of them. They didn't win them. Biden lost one by 15, and the Democrat lost it by 7. But you get, big gap. And I also understand the argument that, hey, you can't take much from a special election, into November. But in all 5 of them, they outperformed. Energy wise, vote wise, the number of people turning out. And so and why was that? It was clear. It was abortion. And so how a party talked itself into thinking, oh, that won't matter now. It's all again, believing their own inflation, border crime. The one thing I always thought that a lot of the pundits did not understand, and I think you guys have been, I've always respected you and your numbers, so and the way you look at things, is that there is such a thing as cross pressure. There is a woman who honestly fears inflation, but also wants her rights and is conflicted about what she's going to do. And she may even say inflation and it's all Biden's fault, but look at but I want my rights, and this other party's a little kooky right now. And that cross pressure was clearly there. And, it could go one, as sometimes it all breaks one way or the other. And so it's not like something's going to happen, but it was clear that cross pressure was there this
year.
Jer?
Yeah, no, I think you summarized it pretty much pretty good. We decided to, it was my idea to zero in on the independent votes. Nobody else was doing it. And this tracking of this election was the most complex data set I've ever seen. I had to really go in to make sense of it. And so this is what I was seeing. When you looked at the issues, the Republicans dominated the top issues. which lent itself to the idea that the red wave is coming. And now you hit on this, you said about the pundits. The pundits were bad because they were looking at poll races where they would see 2-point leads, and journalists just don't know how to read polls. When they think there's a 2-point lead in a poll, they think, oh, whoever's ahead 2 points is winning. That's not how it works. There's a margin of error. So you had all of that, you'd see the Trafalgar come out, and Republicans were ahead by 2, and then even some of the other non-Republican polls were showing it. But I think you got to go to New Hampshire to find the pony in all of it. And New Hampshire was tight. And so what I discovered in the data was election fraud, and drilling that was really turning off the independents. Why? To really get behind MAGA, and it didn't used to be this way, it's become this way. You're the only way to get initiated into MAGA is to talk about the fraudulent election of 2020. And why would independents, well, how is that going to motivate them to come to the Republican camp? So the drilling of that message really shot Republicans in the foot, and that played out in New Hampshire. Yeah. That's how Bolduc fell behind 9 points behind Hassan, because, well, he started denying his election denial. And so, I mean, it just, long story short, if it came down to inflation, Republicans were going to win. But it was more than that, because independent voters didn't like the Republican candidates. They only said Republicans do better on the top issues.
Jeremy, well, you're definitely right about the election denier stuff. I mean, that's clear. And that's why huge, nominating a majority, like 400 of them for governor, senators, Congress was, obviously helped make it close. But the other thing that was interesting to me, I was in some focus groups in suburbs with undecided white men. And, you get to that place where you go, like, what's the biggest problem? They're all of them were, it's inflation, gas prices. Oh my gosh. Eggs cost this much, all of the things that you would expect. And then the moderator asked him, well, who do you blame? What's caused this? And what was amazing in all 4 groups, undecided white men, which, by the way, is pretty hard to get to, as you guys know, there weren't a whole lot of them. But what was fascinating to me was they would kind of like, well, COVID, supply chain, Russia invading Ukraine, it was, they didn't blame Washington. They didn't blame Biden. I mean, there was not a visceral thing that I expected. And that made me start to think, well, man, if the cross pressure is these issues that they're banging on, and you've got the election denier thing happening and Dobbs, I thought that's what made me, when I saw those groups, it was like, it wasn't what I thought. I was really prepared sitting on the other side of that glass to see Biden. And they just didn't have that kind of, I've seen it against like 4 or 5 other presidents out there, but I mean, on different things. For some reason, it just didn't, he wasn't in it. It was like he wasn't in the race. I mean, he wasn't a big player in terms of where people were deciding. It's almost like even if I care about inflation, I can get Biden next time. It was like there was something else happening where they weren't focused on it as the driver. And these were white guys, not women. So I thought, it was pretty interesting to me.
If I could ask this, and I'm sorry, Dad, that you can jump in after, but so we talked about the retrospect, and the way I sum it up is Republicans had the clear lead on the issues, but a lot of the candidates weren't really setting the world on fire. Ron DeSantis is a different story, but that's at the governor level. Put that aside. All right, so that's our retrospect. At the end of the day, the nation is still divided. The Senate is pretty much divided. There's a very small lead in the House. What do Democrats take away from this going into 2024 in their messaging? Because they didn't really set the world on fire. Nobody really performed great in the House or the Senate races. when you look at the big picture. What's the lesson for the ground game going into 2024?
Well, I mean, ground game, I think Democrats spent more on the ground than they've ever spent. I mean, and I think that's going on in Georgia right now. I mean, massive amounts, and a lot more on digital targeted targeting of voters with digital messages than combined with still the massive spend both parties do on television, which is mind-boggling to me. the way that still dominates the spending. But I think two things that I think are, looking at 2024. One, there were a lot of people when it started to get close in the House, talking about maybe the Democrats, we could hold it by 2 seats if California 13 and Colorado 3, broke a few votes the other way, maybe we could do that. But the other side of that coin was McCarthy with this caucus and the number of election deniers, conspiracy theorists, and others that are in that caucus. Look, we went through 4 years of, I think, what a lot of people would think was a pretty chaotic presidency. I think with Trump, I think it's going to be look for a chaotic Congress, and it'll be the GOP that's the crazy car because of just that, whether it's 30, 40, whatever members of the Freedom Caucus and we're seeing this already in the speaker's fight. So the one thing that we needed to have happen in 2022 was for that to be there, and they did with a lot of candidates. I think it'll be interesting to see whether McCarthy or anybody can lead that caucus in a way that doesn't make that same thing happen daily in governing, for the next 2 years. That doesn't answer your question about Democrats, but I think that's important. The second thing about it, though, is when you look at the mix, I think over 40 years of age, Democrats lost it by 10, something like that. You guys can correct me. Under 40, they won by like 18. With the Gen Z being like 30 something but it all averaging out. The thing that this reminds me a lot of, and I just want to run this by you. I was there. And I just wrote a piece on this, but it helps that I've seen the movie before. So it's a lot of this isn't like I'm smart. No, I was alive in 2010. I saw how crazy candidates lost the Republicans their fight for the Senate, and I saw maybe it was going to happen a lot larger in 2022. But in the late 70s, as Carter faltered, as the Carter presidency faltered, young people started to respond to Ronald Reagan and the Reagan Revolution. And if you go back and look at the headlines, I was just doing, it's all, Reagan lures youth into Republican Party for a lifetime, all that stuff. It really, the Reagan Revolution attracted so many people in that new generation, just as they were voting for the first time, and as they were being repelled by what they saw as failure of Carter or whatever the problems were with Democrats, it led to literally to registration parity between Republicans and Democrats, which hadn't happened since, New Deal. Democrats had been ahead of all that. What I think it may be the biggest takeaway from this election is that Gen Z in particular, the election denying, the science denying, whatever you want to call it, the repulsion they have for the racist and other stuff that sort of Trump flames, is I think the GOP is on the verge, like the Democrats lost the Reagan generation. I think Republicans, MAGA in particular are on the verge of losing the party this generation forever. I mean, I'm not saying that they'll want to be Democrats. I'm just saying that they know what party they aren't and they don't belong to, so I think that's the biggest takeaway for me that I think a lot of people are missing. And my point by that is, if they don't right the ship soon to be attractive to those voters, if this keeps up now, what happened in 2022, and you see it again in 2024 because of a crazy Congress or or investigations that lead nowhere and all that kind of, whatever it is that's going to happen here, I think they'll never get that generation. I mean, that'll be a generation. Yeah, maybe Democrats have to make sure they come out to vote, but I don't think they'll ever. It'll take a Reagan, somebody, a different personage than what's out there right now. Even DeSantis to pull them back in.
Yeah. That was there are a number of things, but I mean, the just carrying through on that. The much vaunted gains that the Republicans were supposed to have made among Latinos didn't happen.
Yeah.
The split, at 61-37 was even less than what George W. Bush had done among Latinos. Better than usual, but not the even split. Blacks, there were some GOP gains. There were 13%, particularly among younger men who maybe 17-18% who voted Republican. Young people, just as you point out, and we have to remember when we're talking about Gen Z, half of Gen Z are people of color.
Right.
So that's another factor. Would you say that Democrats control the conversation now, whereas through much of the last year or so, the GOP had controlled the conversation?
No, I still think that the GOP controls the conversation. And the reason for that, I think, is the information infrastructure that's, whether it's Murdoch and Fox and Breitbart and, I mean, they just have a better, like, no one's created that. I don't think there's been that kind of chamber, echo chamber, whatever you want to call it. The mainstream media will cover things, and the Democrats said this, the Republicans said that. That's not how Fox or Breitbart or any of those, most of those cover things. And so what I mean by that is, even when it wasn't the Democrats that created Dobbs, right? I mean, it was like, in other words, Dobbs was a thing because it actually happened, and the Republicans have been trying to do it for 40 or 50 years. So it gave us something to argue. But I think in terms of, like, you look at crime, the border stuff, inflation, that was what was out there being driven. So much so that actually by the end, you actually had Democrats on TV before the election talking about how we lost and where we got it wrong because we weren't talking about inflation and the economy enough. And, and Democrats on television talking about how everybody knows it's the economy, stupid. Remember the words of James Carville. So somehow I think this was more the Republicans doing this to themselves in terms of drive. In other words, you could talk inflation, crime, and border all you wanted, but you had a bunch of Carrie Lakes and Herschel Walkers and people out there saying crazy things that actually they were driving. I mean, they were still there, right? They're still saying that. And Dobbs, if you think there's people saying crazy things and you think the court just did something really extreme, it kind of like reverberated and I think made people even more fearful about what a Carrie Lake or a Masters or Herschel Walker can do. Now we'll see what happens in Georgia, but I still think that it was the extremism overwhelmed everything else, and that's the only explanation I have for what happened.
I agree. Jer, last question from you.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about, I can't remember. I read this this morning. I can't remember the article, but if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, and this blows me away because the consensus is that Trump is toxic, right? And even a lot of Republicans, and not just major donors, but even strategists are saying he's got to go. But I read this morning that his record for the midterms was something like, if I'm not mistaken, of hundreds of candidates that he backed, something like over 200 won and 8 lost. And so I'm just trying to reconcile that. Of course, you turn on the television and there's no shortage of the notion that he's a narcissist. This guy is toxic to the Republican Party. But with a record like that, I mean, what's going on here? Is that the disconnect between what's happening among his base and who love him, and that the top of the RNC are moving away from him? How does that work out? How does that go? How does that play out a year from now?
In 2015, Politico asked me and a bunch of other people, how long would Trump be around and have an impact on the party? And I was like the only one who said, as long as he wants to. And you don't underestimate him. I think the notion that he's finished is crazy. He's got a massive hold on on the MAGA cult in the party, or whatever you want to call it, who love and adore him. And I really think, like DeSantis, okay, you beat him, fine. We're now in, if I can't have her, you can't have her world. Watch. I mean, you can't, there's no way to win with him. I mean, the GOP can't, my own view, can't get out of this. He's not going to go away. If he's indicted, he'll be talking about how it's all the deep state trying to stop him, and those people will hang with him, and he may get beat in the primaries. I'm not saying that, but if he does, he's going to take those people and they're going to sit on their hands. It's not going to be like Bernie Sanders and Hillary. That'll make it look like that was just, a mini little spat compared to what'll happen here. So I still think that I don't see how, and by the way, that's McCarthy's whole problem for how he tries to put the votes together for speaker. I'm not even sure he's going to be able to do that. In fact, I wouldn't bet on that right now.
I wouldn't either. Hey, Joe, how do people find you? And where are you writing these days or appearing?
Well, I'm at Joe Trippi on Twitter. I have my own podcast, That Trippi Show, wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find it. And I am writing for Resolute Square, which is a new pro-democracy hub we've created to try to take on the disinformation and take on the conspiracy theories and other things out there. But if you listen to That Trippi Show, I'd give it a listen. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, Joe. What a pleasure. Commit that you'll do this again.
Obviously, yeah, absolutely. I've always enjoyed it. Always enjoyed our conversation and our friendship over the years, John.
Absolutely. Same here. Thanks again. And Jer, we'll see you on the show next week. I'll see you in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Take care.
Guys.
Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.